Hi everyone, this is Professor Ellis. I want to welcome you now to week 4 of science fiction. I hope that you're all doing well. Before we get started, I just wanted to say a reminder that everything that's going on this semester is something that we're all in together. I've mentioned it before, I'll continue to mention it throughout the semester that if anything comes up that you need to reach out to me, please let me know. You can simply send me an email, jellis@citytech.cuny.edu, or you can also come to my office hours on Wednesdays from 3 until 5 p.m. Or if you can't come during those times, you can also send me an email and let me know what your availability is. And I'll try to find a time where my time syncs with yours, and we'll set up a meeting, whether it be on Google Hangouts, Zoom, on the phone. One way or another, we'll make that happen. But because these times are very challenging in a lot of different ways, I also just wanted to give a shout out to something that came across my email this morning, which you should have also received, but just to make sure that you noticed it. CUNY now has a new free 24/7 confidential crisis support text messaging service. You can send a text message to 741741, and it's available 24/7, and they have trained people who can help you with those moments where you might be overly stressed, sad, or just having a moment that you can't seem to get over or can't seem to shake. I think this is really good that CUNY, amongst all of the other services that are available here in the city, are trying to make things possible for us to continue moving forward. Because I think that's what's key and something to always keep in mind, that with your studies, with your work, with all your responsibilities, that a certain part of it is being able to keep your momentum moving forward, that you're not wanting to stop or simply go backwards. Whereas these types of services are a way to lift you up, a way to keep you from falling under the weight of things. So if you need these things, please take advantage of them. And there are other things that are available through City Tech that you can look under the student section on the citytech.cuny.edu website, that are not just for mental health, but also services for providing small loans in order to get you through paying rent at the end of the month, being able to put food on the table if if you've lost your job. There's a lot of different initiatives that City Tech, CUNY, and New York City provide. And while obviously I'm not a trained counselor and I'm not going to pretend to be, if you are having trouble in whatever it might be, whether it be with mental health, with financial problems, whatever it is, that's something else. While you don't have to tell me all the details, if you let me know something's going on, you need help connecting with someone that can help you with those things, I'll help find those people for you. So don't think that just because I'm just a science fiction professor that I'm not willing and wanting to help everybody, because I do want to see you all be successful. And relying on some of these systems that we have in place is one way to do that. But because there's so many of them, and it can be difficult to find them, sometimes you just need to ask. And so again, don't suffer in silence. If something does come up, you need to connect with someone. Let me know, and I'll see if I can find out who that is, and put you in touch with that person, or give you that contact email, whatever it might be. Because again, this is something that I want us all to see this through this semester together. So looking ahead to our class, what do we need to take care of this week? Well, first off, I want to make sure that you have your notebooks out, that you're going to be making notes. Remember the Cornell note-taking method. You can look that up if you need a reminder of what that ought to look like. But make sure that you're making notes of the lectures, making notes of the readings, and as I'll talk about today with the research essay, that you're making notes on whatever it is you choose to write your essay about. And again, this is a big part of your grade, so you want to rely on your note-taking as a means to support and help your intellectual work in the class. Then with grades, just I've had a couple emails I need to get back to people about this week. Remember that you can access your grades in the class. I'm going to zip over to our Open Lab site by clicking Course Gradebook. But now the thing is, right now there aren't any grades because the way that I design the class and the way that I encourage students to be responsible for their progress in the class is that with smaller assignments like the weekly writing assignments, those should be things that you're self-monitoring, right? I mean, we are all adults here. You have certain responsibilities as far as your participation in the class that you should keep an eye on. And so with the smaller assignments, I want you to be watching whether you've done those or not. Obviously right now you've had just a few comments that you've made to our Open Lab site. And so let me show you how you can find out if you're keeping up with those things. So right now I'm logged into Open Lab, and you'd want to log in to Open Lab. Go to our course site. You got Boba Fett and all of his buddies here hanging out. And then mouse over this part in the middle at the very top of our Open Lab site, where it says English ENG2420 OL74. And you'll want to click on Dashboard. Now in the dashboard, this is kind of under the hood. This is behind the scenes of what makes our Open Lab site work. And you're not going to have access to everything here because I'm an administrator. You have a different role in the class as a student, but you can go to comments over here on the left and click on comments. Now with comments, you should be able to see your comments listed here, but if you don't see them right away, then you can search for your name or your username here in this box. Just type in your username or your name as you would have used it with Open Lab, click search comments, and you're going to see them all listed. And each of your comments, and you'll see listed to the right in what its response to. And so you'll be able to kind of check off, okay, week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4, and know that you've done all the assignments in the class. If something's missing, well, this is the reason why I want you guys to be writing your responses in a word processor someplace off of Open Lab so you can save your work. Because if a particular weekly writing assignment is missing that you know you've done, what you can do is resubmit it, send me an email just letting me know, hey, Professor Ellis, I turned this in like 3 weeks ago or however long ago it was. For some reason it didn't appear on Open Lab when I checked, but it is there now. And then I'll go back and check it off for you. So that's something that I want you to keep an eye on to make sure that your work is being posted correctly. Now, the things that I'll be adding to the grade book will be the larger projects in the class. And so we got one coming up not too long from now. That'll be the midterm. And the midterm is you showing me your notebooks. And that's going to be 20% of your grade. And I'll need that in order to input into CUNY First whether your midterm is satisfactory or not. And again, just as a reminder, midterm grades don't figure into your GPA at all. It's just simply like a warning system to let students know if their grades aren't up to snuff or not. So we have that midterm class notebook coming up, and I give you instructions here on how to make a copy of that using like a scanning app like Dropbox. And I'll let you guys know how to submit those when we get a little bit closer to that. So let's see when the actual due date for that is. We're week 4 here, concluding Frankenstein. We got readings for next week, H.G. Wells' The Time Machine Abridged. We got E.M. Forster's The Machine Stops. Gave you links to both of those. And then we have what's due next week was the weekly writing assignment. Week 5. weekly writing assignment, and the midterm notebook. So next week's lecture, I'll just give a quick overview about how to scan and submit. I'll give you a link basically where you'll submit your midterm notebooks to on Dropbox, and that way I can collect them all together and be able to look over your PDFs that you've made and then grade them so I can generate your midterm grade for CUNY first. So make sure that you pay attention to next week's lecture so that you'll know how to get those turned in. Alright, so that's grades. Looking ahead on the syllabus, we just did that. So we know that we need to take care of the midterm notebooks next week, and also you know what the readings are, and I'll review that again at the end of today's class when we discuss homework. So that brings us to the main two things in today's class. We need to conclude Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, and then we're going to discuss the research essay. I've been looking over everyone's responses so far to the weekly writing assignments about things that you're observing, reading Frankenstein, the connections that you're making to things that you are aware of, already know about. I think this is great that you're doing that kind of intellectual work. And so what I wanted to talk about today are just some particular points that some of you did pick up on and a few others, just so that you're thinking about them. And these are things that you can include in your notes, that you might write about in this week's weekly writing assignment. And they may be things that you connect to other examples of science fiction that you may want to talk about either in the weekly writing assignments or maybe thinking ahead to your research essay. But we'll talk about that in just a moment. So I just want to briefly go over a summary of the story again. I covered this in a previous lecture, but I think it's good just to make sure everybody's aware of what are the major plot points that take place in Frankenstein. So again, we are concluding this week Mary Wollstonecraft. Make sure you get her first, middle, and last name correctly. Mary, M-A-R-Y, Wollstonecraft, W-O-L-L-S-T-O-N-E-C-R-A-F-T, Shelley, S-H-E-L-L-E-Y. It's always important to get writers' names correct. Look back at previous lectures for an author's birth date and death date. You need to know these, not just because you are all becoming experts of science fiction studies, but it's also going to be important at the end of the semester with the final exam, where I'll be checking these things off. So we read Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley's 1818 novel Frankenstein, or The Modern Prometheus. It is about Victor Frankenstein, who turned away from pseudoscience and alchemy and pursued the sciences of chemistry and galvanism and also anatomy to discover how to give life to inanimate matter. He constructs a creature that looks like a large man, but he abandons it in horror and disgust. The creature, a being with a mind like a blank slate, a tabula rasa, uses reason, observation, and trial and error to learn how to survive, how to speak, read, and write. Believing that he had mastered language enough to convince a family of refugees to accept him, he confronts them, but they recoil in horror. Angry at humanity for how he had been treated, not just by his creator abandoning him, earlier assaults that he received from people before he had acquired language, and then with the DeLacy family. The creature then chooses vengeance against his creator. He kills Victor's younger brother William and frames the innocent Justine for the crime. Then he bargains with his creator, build a mate for him, and he agrees to leave humanity alone. Victor agrees to the creature's demands and travels to the far reaches of Scotland to create a female version of his creature. But then realizing she will have free will and reason just like the creature, he destroys his work before giving her life so as to avoid her unknown choices and possibly the creation of a new race of beings. Enraged, his creature tells Victor, quote, "I will be with you on your wedding night," end quote, and then flees. The creature kills Victor's best friend Clerval, and Victor is suspected of the crime. Released, Victor makes his way back to Switzerland to marry his Elizabeth. After the wedding, the creature kills Elizabeth, and Victor pursues him all the way to the Arctic, where Victor meets Captain Walton from the beginning of the story. After Victor's death, the creature appears to Captain Walton, laments his creator's passing, and disappears, vowing to end his own life. So, as I mentioned before, this is a story that I think turns on this shift from pseudoscience and alchemy. The belief that using magic essentially would allow you to do fantastic feats, such as transmuting metals from base metals like lead into wealthier metals like gold, being able to raise the dead, to conjure spirits. But as Victor notes in the novel himself, as he's reading about these things as like a teenager before he goes to college, he's not able to accomplish anything with alchemy. He's always, like, whenever he's trying to conjure a spirit, for example, and it doesn't work, he ascribes the failure to himself. Like, maybe he didn't say the words right, or maybe he didn't have the right concoction made. But the thing is with alchemy is that it lacks science's reproducibility. That if you perform an experiment in science, that same experiment, if you do everything exactly the same, at a different point in time, a different person doing it, that you can reproduce the results of that experiment. And so in the story, once Victor has gone to college and he gets his eyes open to science and to how science gives you power that you did not have with alchemy, he sets his sights again on some of the things that he wanted to do with alchemy itself. Because as Victor is growing up, you can imagine health and death were on the forefront of people's minds. I mean, obviously people didn't live as long back then. Disease was rampant in a variety of different kinds. Use simple things like hygiene that we use today in order to prevent certain types of diseases wasn't widely accepted or acknowledged the way that it is today. And therefore, life expectancy was much lower. Childhood mortality was much higher. So these were things that would have made death be on people's minds, probably much more so than it is today, where we live longer for the most part. Childhood mortality, at least in the developing world, is better. So one of Victor's important things that he kind of set his sights on very early on is this idea of eradicating disease, achieving a sense of immortality, and essentially be able to live as long as you can unless you are visited upon by some sort of violent intervention. Like, your today's analogy would be like you get caught in a car crash, or something violent happens to you, you're attacked and you're beaten to death. That kind of thing would be the only thing that would kill you, that you wouldn't have to worry about your health or your body being the thing that succumbs to death on its own or from a disease. But once he gets to college, what's interesting is that Victor's self-assurance and Victor's hubris that I mentioned in an earlier lecture are paramount to determining what happens next. In that while Victor's like learning a lot in chemistry and also beginning to learn about anatomy, he's not content with doing something small. He's not wanting to be the scientist that provides the incremental increases to our knowledge. He wants to aspire to something much greater. He wants to be remembered as being a genius amongst scientists. He wants to be a figure that people look back on and is remembered. And it's that hubris that he has that carries over from his youth and his interest in alchemy that he brings with him to this newfound power in science, that he essentially creates his own downfall by being hubristic. Because remember that with hubris that you are going to be attacked essentially by Nemesis. Nemesis is going to seek retribution because in your hubris towards the gods, your hubris towards a god, your hubris towards nature, perhaps, however you want to frame it, you might think of Victor as exceeding what was permissible. And so Nemesis has to seek vengeance on the hubristic figure, which in this case is Victor Frankenstein. Now, again, just a quick overview for you to remember about it being a science-saturated novel, that Victor is essentially an interdisciplinary scientist. And if you think of science in its infancy at that time, that the very early scientists were all interdisciplinary, because at that time there wasn't yet the strong disciplinary divisions that we see today, that we're in fact trying to, in different ways, recover from. What I mean by that is when you situate sciences within disciplinary silos, while they may foster the development of that science in its quote-unquote purest form, they're also limiting science by not looking at the results, not looking at procedures, not looking at possibilities from the different perspectives that are afforded to us by different sciences, by different ways of seeing things. And so in this early stages of scientific development from the Enlightenment and the scientific revolution, scientists were just interdisciplinary from the very basis of what science was. That you wouldn't just be doing chemistry, you would likely be doing lots of different sciences. And you might be finding linkages between them. Whereas today, if you go into a particular field, as you all know from like your disciplines here at City Tech that you're studying for, is that it is by and large situated in a silo. But we're trying to break out of that mold with like the baccalaureate degrees we have here at City Tech, is that you have to take an interdisciplinary course, one in which that's either taught by two different professors from different disciplines, or that it is taught by a number of different professors giving different perspectives on the same problem as a way to help illuminate the power of interdisciplinarity. And then you might think of it, that's the power that Victor uses to create his creature in Frankenstein. And so we have like these different sciences that Victor is focused on, where we have electricity, something that he was fascinated with before he went to college because of that lightning strike when he was out in the mountains, and he was amazed at its destructive power. And he thought, what else might you use it for? And then with galvanism, where you would apply electrical currents to inanimate matter, to like your dead animals, and be able to elicit twitches and muscle contractions, which at that time there wasn't yet a full understanding of what death was. And so when you would see this reanimation of muscles and the muscles causing bodies to move, the question was, is it possible to revive a dead animal or a dead human being through galvanism? And that preoccupies Victor's imagination. But he also gets involved in human anatomy. You can imagine at this time is where there's like a resurgence of work done in understanding how the human body works, which in some ways a lot of that knowledge was lost from antiquity due to primarily religious reasons and the beliefs about like how you shouldn't desecrate dead bodies. But there are also like some practical matters as well, as like spreading disease, and that without proper protocols, it's very easy to do that. And someone dealing with dead bodies can end up killing themselves from being infected with something from a deceased person. So human anatomy is something that is another science that's being developed during this time. Victor is observing, as is probably other people at that time, observing dissections, public dissections, and learning from these things. But related to that is thanatology. Make sure you get this word in your notes, Thanatology. So with thanatology, you might recognize part of that word from something that's been a huge part of popular culture in recent years with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Thanos, the big death dealer in the Marvel Cinematic Universe and the Marvel Comics. And his name derives from not just this word, thanatology, but where this word derives from, Thanatos, which is a Greek mythical figure who is responsible for death. And so thanatology is the study of death, the study of not just death, but also of what happens after you die, both in terms of forensics, which is a big thing today, but also in terms of Victor, thinking about what happens to dead bodies and how might dead bodies be revived, how they might be reassembled. And in particular, I wanted to point out there's a much longer quote here. I collected bones from charnel houses. There's a paragraph in chapter 4 that you should go back and look at. But I think it's important to remember that Victor Frankenstein's creature is, I think, something we can imagine as quite gross. Charnel houses are places where dead bodies would be dissected. You imagine that at that time you wouldn't donate your body to science. There were people who surreptitiously would go dig up dead bodies, and they would be used for scientific study. There were people that would do this for pay. They would be paid, and this they were essentially committing a crime. But more than likely, Victor would have participated in this in order to get all the dead matter, the dead bodies he would need, both for his studies as well as for the material that he would use to assemble his creature. But now you can imagine this is decomposing human flesh. It would be quite smelly. There would be lots of fluids. This was a very dirty business that Victor Frankenstein is engaged in. And this would have been something that Mary Shelley would have known about and her readership would have realized. In a sense, that's a big part of the horror of all this, that what Victor Frankenstein is doing. But it's also important to think about that the creature itself, because Victor is having to assemble this new creature, out of dead matter, from different bodies he's taking the parts from, but also the fact, like, his hands are only so large. There wasn't yet like sciences of microsurgery, for example, that we have today. So he's having to build this creature kind of larger than life, because I mean, how do you get in there to work with all this different tissues without the advancements in medical science that we have today? So he's building this huge human-like body out of dead body parts that he's reanimating using chemistry, using galvanism, and bringing it to life. And when it awakes, there's that famous line of the yellow eye that looks back at Victor, and then Victor like freaks out and runs away. But at that point, the creature itself doesn't have any knowledge, because again, at that time, one of the prevailing views of like what constitutes the mind once like we're born, and again, this is even though this creature is built from dead body parts from human beings that were already born, the thinking is that this creature is newly born, right? And so its mind is a blank slate, is that tabula rasa. It doesn't have any knowledge. It's not like what we might think of today, that the brain would have constituted like the identity of whoever that dead person was before that brain got put into the creature's new body. But as far as what was known at that time, Mary Shelley thinks, okay, well, once this creature is reanimated, brought to life, it's going to have a blank slate. It's starting from scratch as far as its brain and intellect and memories are concerned. Now, there's a few other things I wanted to mention about all this, and this big question is like, what is it about? What's like the main theme? And I think that looking at a modern example of science fiction that you're probably familiar with, hopefully you've all seen it at some point, is Jurassic Park from 1993. And there's that famous line from the chaotician, the mathematician in Malcolm, to the park owner, John Hammond. And in Malcolm says, "Your scientists were so preoccupied over whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think if they should." And this is the ethical dimension of science that I think is an important part of science fiction, is that it's able to question the ethics around what are the ramifications of a science. What are the effects of science and technology on our world, on human beings as individuals, as also human society? Because there are oftentimes things that are done in science or things that are created technologically that have unintended consequences, or the full extent of the consequences haven't really been thought out, and as a result, it leads to a lot of bad problems. And this question of ethics is not just something that's we can say is academic. We can say, well, as from our armchairs are able to question these things. But ethics in terms of science and technology are a really super big deal when we start thinking about industries that are built around them, such as like transportation. And you probably saw in the news the other day about that jet engine exploding and dropping the engine housing across some of the towns in Colorado. This is a problem. There's ethics about the design of these things, the repair of these things, and also the maintenance of these things, because there can be real consequences when a plane disintegrates or falls from the sky and all those people are killed, all those families are affected. Maybe because there wasn't enough safety checks, maybe because it cuts into the bottom line of the airline or the aircraft manufacturer or the engine manufacturer, all of these things are interconnected, and there are ethics around them that need to be implemented. Part of that comes from government oversight, something that we the people empower our government to do. But then there are also like limitations to that, and then that's where we can reach in again as a people and say we need to question the ethics of this to make sure that things are done correctly, to minimize as much as possible the negative impacts of these things. You might also think about, like in medical sciences, you are, for example, maybe getting radiation to treat cancer. And the thing about radiation is that the effect of that radiation on cancer cells is going to destroy the cancer cells. But that same radiation, if it's pointed at the wrong place, is going to destroy healthy cells. And so there have been cases in the past where the computer programming that controls the different types of radiation systems that both position the human body in relation to the radiation source, as well as the mechanical structure of these things, so that if the mechanics are not constructed right in such a way that are understood by those designing the controllers, it can also cause a positioning problem. And so there were people that did get hurt in very bad ways when they went in for procedures that were meant to save them, and in fact actually led to their demise. So again, this is where there needs to be this ethical dimension to things, to make sure that things are done properly, to make sure that problems are minimized, that people are made safe. And in science fiction, we can try to do that work. Obviously, it's not always listened to, because like even before our current pandemic that we find ourselves in, with 500,000 people dead in the United States as a result of COVID-19, there's been plenty of warnings in science fiction about the effects of pandemics and how we should prepare for them. And there's also obviously lots of warnings in the real sciences within government think tanks and government agencies, but a lot of this wasn't paid attention to. So at a certain point, you can do everything that you can to try to put the message out there, but unfortunately the message isn't always listened to either. So finally, a couple things that I did want to mention here. Who do we identify with in the novel, right? From my own perspective, Victor Frankenstein is not a nice guy. He's so preoccupied both in what he wants to achieve in order to gain fame, lasting fame, and also fixated on the creature's nemesis-like attacks on him, that he's kind of ignoring the safety of those around him. Clerval dies, Elizabeth dies, while he's running around doing his own thing. He doesn't stop to think what might happen to them, or at least he doesn't stop long enough in a serious way to question that. But I think ultimately in the novel, Mary Shelley is guiding us toward identifying with this creature. This is a creature that's born unnaturally. If we want to think about it, human beings are born from women, from a womb. And this creature has a very unnatural birth. It's a male birth. Victor Frankenstein is a man who has constructed the creature in an unnatural environment, out of unnatural materials, out of dead things, and has imbued it with life. Now, if we think about, in general, a woman given birth is going to have a bond between the mother and child. Whereas with this unnatural male birth, you have Victor Frankenstein, run away from his creation. He totally abdicates responsibility to this new being that he's brought into the world when he runs away. Everything could have turned out completely differently had Victor Frankenstein accepted responsibility for what he had made. Because the creature, I think, if we think in his essence, is good-natured. He keeps trying to make a connection with others. But because, he's made out of dead things, he probably smells, he's dirty, he's gross. People can't see past that grotesqueness of his appearance. And as a result, that no matter what he does, he keeps getting beat down, pushed away by other people. And ultimately, he gets to a point where it's not like just the first time he decides, I'm going to act out and just start obliterating everybody. It takes time for him to get to that point where he's at his last straw, essentially. And so I think we're ultimately called on to identify with him because he's the one that is being castigated, not through any fault of his own, but because of this abdication of responsibility by his creator. Because I think that had Victor Frankenstein owned up to what he did and helped this creature, that the creature wouldn't have acted out in these very bad ways toward Victor's family, who were ultimately the ones on the receiving end of his vengeance. But now, the thing about Victor Frankenstein, the creature, and also just the work itself, Frankenstein, or the modern Prometheus, is that it has this lasting impact on popular culture, and in particular, film legacy. And I just wanted to switch over here. This is the Wikipedia entry for Frankenstein. There's this whole section on films, plays, and television. And you can see here, like very early on, even before this edition of Frankenstein that we read, because this was the 1831 edition, in 1823, so this is only like 5 years after the publication of the first edition, it gets turned into a stage play. One which reports here that Mary Shelley and her father William Godwin attended. So she even got to see her work adapted from the book into a stage play. But then once we got film technology, moving pictures, it's adapted into film, where there's an edition from Edison Studios in 1910. There's this 1915 Life Without Soul adaptation, which no film print survived, they say. But probably the most famous is the 1931 Universal Studios production of Frankenstein, directed by James Whale. One thing that I'll mention about all these different film versions that you can probably access in one way or another is that unfortunately the story as it's adapted is quite different. If you've now read the novel and you've seen some of these film adaptations, is that the film versions have a very different story. There's different characters, there's different relationships. It's not the same thing. They are clearly adaptations with changes to the narrative. But one thing that I did want to point out about Frankenstein and then the later 1935 Bride of Frankenstein sequel is that James Whale was a known homosexual film director. And so it's interesting, I think, to watch those particular films now, because you can see that the way that he's telling the story, that there are elements of homoeroticism in those depictions that make them stand out in their own right, I think, as important cultural artifacts. not necessarily faithful adaptations of Mary Shelley's story, but they have their not only lasting impact of giving us the image of Boris Karloff with the makeup of Frankenstein, but I think that they're important, touchstones for this homoerotic depictions between characters within the films at a time when that was not something that would have been looked upon favorably by the general public. Now, one thing I thought was interesting, for a number of reasons, this 2004 Frankenstein adaptation that appeared of all places was a Hallmark production of Mary Shelley's tale. Several sources and some reviews that I found online actually say this is one of the most faithful adaptations. So if you do want to see something visual, you might seek out this particular version. You see Donald Sutherland is one of the actors there, as being a more faithful depiction of the narrative that we have now encountered in the text. But there are also other versions that are fun, just like Young Frankenstein from Mel Brooks is a favorite of mine. But again, these are things that are playing more with the pop cultural idea of Frankenstein rather than a straight telling of the narrative itself. And the narrative, I keep using that word, but narrative is simply the plot, the story that's being told. All right, so looking ahead on the syllabus for next week, as far as what our readings are concerned, we're going to be looking at closer to the point where we get a word for science fiction. We get a term for science fiction. We're not there yet, but we're very close. And so with that in mind, we're going to be looking at H.G. Wells' The Time Machine. This is the abridged version I've given you a link to on the Project Gutenberg website in Australia, where the text is available. And then E.M. Forster's The Machine Stops. And what's interesting to be thinking about is that I could have had you read something different from H.G. Wells that is very utopian, meaning like it's imagining like this very perfect world in which technology allows us to live our best lives, essentially. And H.G. Wells was recognized as being a popularizer and a supporter of technology for making the world a better place. Not everybody agreed with that view. And so H.G. Wells, while he was known for that, E.M. Forster was not by any stretch of the imagination a science fiction writer in the same way that we think of H.G. Wells. E.M. Forster was a famous British novelist. Don't get me wrong there, and I'll talk more about him next week. But it's suffice to say for now that he wanted to write something in opposition to Wells's view of the future, that he wanted to question our reliance or over-reliance on technology. And so E.M. Forster's The Machine Stops, the second reading for next week, which you can access here, and actually whenever you read it on the Hathi Trust website that I linked to, this is you're seeing it here exactly the way someone would have seen it in 1909, though printed rather than obviously on a computer screen. But this is a scan of the original version of The Machine Stops. So I think that's really cool that we have access to that online. So pay attention, though, to the technologies that E.M. Forster is imagining, because it is eerie how prophetic his thinking is in terms of what the world of The Machine Stops will be like. Because in many ways, it's very much like our world today, particularly since the pandemic started. So kind of you think about like how that world is like ours, but he wrote this in 1909, over 100 years ago. All right, so those will be the 2 readings for next week. So what we need to talk about now is this research essay. So looking over the syllabus, you know that under the grading section, there is this research essay that's worth 25% of your grade. And this is going to be coming up due at the very end of the semester. But I like to introduce this now to make sure that I give everybody plenty of time, not only to select what you're going to be working on, but to begin doing some research on it, so that you're not like you're having to cram it all in at the very end of the semester. Giving you a lot more time, I think, helps you produce something that is of a higher quality, which obviously will earn you a higher grade, but it also will help you from getting totally stressed out at the very end of the semester, because I don't want that to happen, because I know that you're going to have a lot of things to do at the end of the semester in all your classes. So the more that we can spread things out, I think it will make it easier on you, while also giving you the best results in terms of like doing something that you're really proud of and is going to get you a really great grade in the class. And also, I want to encourage you all, just thinking ahead, there's a lot of opportunities here at City Tech, such as with the City Tech Writer, our annual literary journal, but then also other publishing opportunities both at City Tech as well as in New York City, where you might consider submitting your work for publication. And even if you don't publish it in something that's like printed or put online, like on a website, you can also include this as an example of your writing, like say on your LinkedIn.com profile, which I know many of you have either been encouraged or that I would encourage you to create to help with your job prospects in the future. Because what's good about all job seeking right now, just to kind of give you the spiel that you should be aware of, is that you're competing for a limited number of jobs that a lot of other people that are as equally qualified as you are to get. But one of the easiest ways to be able to distinguish yourself from others is being able to show that you have good communication skills. Because there's not a job on the planet, except for like maybe the one job of like being a lone hermit in a shack measuring like a weather station in Antarctica maybe, but in all other cases where you're working with other people, being able to say you have good communication skills distinguishes you and sets you apart from others. Now everybody puts on their resume great communication skills. Well, it's like pics or it didn't happen. You need to be able to show that you have these skills. Doing quality writing like this, or video recording a great presentation in another class, those types of things, and then putting them like as a part of a portfolio, whether it be your portfolio that you can make on OpenLab or your portfolio of documents that you can put on LinkedIn.com or on a personal website, are like surefire ways of being able to prove you know how to do these communication things. So I want you to be thinking that, while certainly I want you to get a good grade in the class, I want you to do all the work, get a good grade. There's plenty of good grades to go around if everybody does quality work. But always be thinking about how to turn the work you do in my class or your other classes towards something bigger outside of class. It could be like being published in a journal or a magazine or a website. It could be adding it to a professional portfolio, being able to show off what you can do. So the work that you do in our class does not have to just remain inside our class. It can go outside our class as a way to be showing off what you're capable of doing. And I can help you with that. And throughout the semester, I'll mention some other things that might be beneficial for you about like job seeking, etc. I know that has nothing to do with science fiction, but because you are all my students, I do genuinely care for like your success, not just in our class, but once you go out into the workplace, right? I mean, I've been there before. I know that It's stressful, it's difficult to get a good job that you want. So any way that I can help you do that, by thinking about how these things we do in our class might contribute to that in some way, I want to point those things out. So with this research essay, it needs to be 1,250 to 1,500 words. So if we think of a single page of writing that's double spaced is on average 250 words, then we're roughly talking 5 to 6 pages of writing, double spaced. Now, it's an analytical essay, meaning that you're going to perform an analysis. You're going to pick something apart. Well, what are you going to pick apart? You're going to choose a single work, okay? A single work for your analysis. It can be a book. It can be a novella. It can be a short story. It can be a TV series. It can be a film. It can be a video game. It can be a music album. It can be a work of art or a series of a work of art, like the art of a particular artist. I'm thinking H.R. Giger, for example. But there's also a lot of other artists, both in comic books as well as in art proper, that you could choose from. But you would choose one of these as the subject of your essay. This would be the thing that you're going to be interrogating, so to speak, that you're going to be analyzing in terms of a question. I'm going to get to that in a second. But once you've kind of settled on an idea of what you want to pick, I want you to send me an email. It can just be science fiction essay topic for the subject. Send it to jellis@citytech.cuny.edu. Say, Dear Professor Ellis, for my science fiction research essay, I would like to write about X, and you tell me what that is. You might tell me some ideas that you're wanting to work on in your essay. And then when I read that, I'll say, oh, this sounds great. I'll reply and say, go for it. But I might also give you some other suggestions. Say maybe a way of honing down your topic to something more manageable. Because with this being a shorter research essay, 5 to 6 pages, I'm not expecting you to do a full analysis of all of Star Trek, for example, from the 1966 series all the way to the present. Impossible to do something of quality analysis that spans so many different pieces of that larger franchise. But what I would suggest is you wrote and said, I'm going to write about Star Trek. Well, I would probably write back and say, well, how about look at a specific series, like maybe the original series, or maybe the animated series, or maybe the Next Generation, or maybe Deep Space Nine, or maybe Voyager, or maybe Discovery, or maybe the films with a particular cast. But the idea is to hone it down, focus it on something that's manageable and also that you can really dive into rather than being overly general, just looking at surface things. Instead, go deeper into the topic that you're going to be discussing. So I'm going to go back and forth with you all over email to make sure that you have a real quality topic. Now, you can email me this anytime. I'm not setting a deadline on this for right now. I may wait a few weeks and then say, hey, for those of you that haven't emailed me yet, you need to email me. Because I don't want people to wait to the last minute, but I also want to give you a little bit of breathing room right now to think this over before you email me. But if you already got an idea, please email me now so you can go ahead and settle on this and begin work right away. So what are you going to be doing in this research essay? So you want to find a question that's going to guide your research. Now, this isn't a question you're going to write in the essay itself. your essay, in a sense, is going to be a response to this question that you're just imagining in your mind. And so, for example, you could take a very simple approach and ask, is this work that you've chosen science fiction? Or you could take maybe a more focused question like, is this feminist science fiction, which we're going to be talking about later this semester? You could say, is this hard science fiction? And then you're going to analyze what you've selected to say whether or not it's hard science fiction. Another big question is like, is this work that some assume is science fiction is actually not science fiction? And so like with this last question, think about like something like Star Wars. I think a lot of people just like, knee-jerk reaction is to say, okay, that's science fiction. But there's a lot of things in Star Wars, and in particular, films as well as some of the different series, that you can't really say is science fiction. It's more fantasy. In which case, you could make an argument where you find someone that says Star Wars is science fiction, you quote that, and then you say, I disagree with what this person says. And in this essay, I will show Star Wars is not science fiction. That's the idea behind this. So through the essay, you're going to be answering the question that you have in your mind through discussion that's supported by evidence. So some of that evidence will be quotations you find in the research of others. And I'll show you like where to find some of those things. Also, that evidence will come from the works themselves, where like if you're talking about Star Wars, you might need to talk about a scene from Star Wars. You need to say what it is, what's going on, who are the characters involved, and what is it about that scene that is science fictional or not, right? But you're talking about specifics, concrete, specific examples. And through that discussion of all these different examples, of all these different discussion points, you're going to be leading up to a conclusion in which you're saying Star Wars is science fiction, or Star Wars is not science fiction, or Star Wars is feminist SF, or it's not feminist SF. You get to choose what that question is and how it relates to science fiction. And I can help you with that too. If this is, I know for some folks that may not have written this kind of essay before, it can be kind of hard to wrap your mind around this the first time. So if you have questions about this, make sure you include that when you email me saying, I want to write my essay on, I don't know, what's something else like, say a recent science fictional video game, Final Fantasy VII Remake for PlayStation 4. You could use something like that, but I don't really know, Professor Ellis, what my question ought to be. And then we can talk back and forth over email or maybe during office hours to help you conceptualize that question that you want to answer in your essay. But now this last point here, conclude by establishing so what. And this is again a rhetorical question. You don't actually write in the essay, but that last paragraph should respond to it in some way. And this is where you say, like, what is the significance of your findings? So it could be as simple as saying that, thinking about Star Wars as not being science fiction actually helps us better understand big screen depictions of science fictional and fantasy elements. Or maybe it could be thinking about saying like, Final Fantasy VII Remake, about how important video games are becoming to our engagement with science fictional themes. So again, there's a lot of different responses that you can come up with here, but you want to think about how is what you're concluding, what are your findings, how are they leading us to something more important in terms of our thinking, in terms of our thinking about science fiction, in terms of how science fiction helps us think about the world, reflect on our world, respond to our world, understand our world. So there's a lot of different possibilities there. And again, this is something that we can work together on if this isn't something that just comes out through your research and your thinking as you work on your research essay. So now, at the very beginning of this, after you've established what you want to be studying, like what is the subject of your research essay, you want to be making notes on the subject of your essay. So as even though you might have read, seen, heard, played, whatever it is before, you need to go do it again, experience it again. And as you do that, you need to be making notes. And so in many ways, choosing something that you enjoy, choosing something that you like, this is a different kind of experience of that thing whenever you're studying it, because you need to look at it with a more critical eye. You need to be able to pause it and reflect on it as you're studying it so that you better understand it. You'll want to focus on concrete examples that you can discuss in relation to the question that you've selected. Again, the question you don't write in the essay, but that you're thinking about as you're doing your research. Now, for your research, besides what you've selected as the subject of your essay, I want you to use the library and other vetted sources to support your claims. You can use the list of science fiction definitions that I gave you that's linked from our Open Lab site. But Wikipedia, I want to just give you this standard disclaimer that I give students. It's a great aggregator of knowledge, meaning it brings together knowledge from different sources, which can help guide your research. There's a lot of sources you will find on Wikipedia that you might use in your research, but Wikipedia itself is not a source you quote from, because everything that's in Wikipedia comes from somewhere else. And we want to follow back to that original source for the ideas. All those citations you see at the end of sentences on a Wikipedia entry, those are the sources that you want to go track down if you want to use some of those ideas in your research essay. Now, I just want to briefly show you today a couple of things with our library and another source that you might use to help you in your initial research for the project. So like right now, just beginning your thinking of this, you may have several different examples of science fiction you want to choose from. Well, before you make your choice, you might want to go to the library's website. You don't actually have to go to the library at CityTech. Go to the library's website and use some of the search tools to see what you might find the most information on. Because if you select something you can't find any additional research on, that may impede your ability to have good sources both to discuss as well as to refute. Like you may want to argue with what someone else has written about the subject of your research essay. But if there's nothing that anybody's written out there, then you don't have anybody to really talk with except yourself. So make sure you put in your notes library.citytech.cuny.edu. Always keep in mind how to get to the CityTech Library's website. Almost all the resources that we have that are online you can access using your CUNY First username and password. So what I want to show you today is under Start Your Research, and just to give you a heads up, we're going to return to this at other points in future lectures. So I don't want you to think this is the only time I'm going to talk about the library, but I just want to kind of start you off with some resources that you might find beneficial. So first off, let's go to Find Articles over here on the left under Start Your Research. Find Articles. And I'm going to list out a couple of kind of go-to databases. Databases are holdings of different electronically available journals. So journals are peer-reviewed meaning that they've been evaluated and vetted sources of information by professionals in the field that ignore if someone is like distinguished or not. All they focus on are the ideas and the evidence and the argument to establish whether this should be published research or not. So you know that things coming from journals are cutting edge, vetted sources of information. It's not stuff that people have just made up, that hasn't been rigorously evaluated. This is things you can trust in your research. So a couple of places that I would begin my research would be first to go to the A's. And two good sources here are Academic OneFile from Gale, and another is Academic Search Complete, EBSCO. Make sure you make a note of those two as being good places to go. And then two other places I want to mention. If you click on J up here in the alphabetical list, JSTOR is another good place to do some research on things related to science fiction. And then go to the P's and scroll down, and there's Project Muse. So we got Academic OneFile from Gale, Academic Search Complete, JSTOR, and Project Muse. So if I go back and just go to Academic Search Complete, really great place when you're just starting out with doing some research. You should see this screen to start with. It's going to ask you to log in with your CUNY First username and password. Excuse me. All right. So just to kind of show you how most of these different databases work, is that they're going to give you results for the terms that you're searching for. But they're not necessarily as smart as, like, say, Google is, because Google doesn't simply search for the terms you type in. It also is incorporating other information such as your search history, what it knows about you, recently visited websites. It's much more complicated in how it comes up with what your search results are. Whereas this is essentially garbage in, garbage out. You put in something, you're going to get exactly what you're looking for. So for example, like let's say I wanted to do my project on say one of the Halo games for Xbox. And so like I'm just going to type in Halo in this first search box and click search. And as you can see, I'm getting like 21,000 results, and none of them, except for this video here, on this first page anyways, has anything to do with video games. So what I would do is I would leave Halo in that first search box, and you can see here I have an operator, meaning I can choose and or not. I want to search for something else that's going to always appear whenever the word Halo in terms of a video game is going to appear. So how about I type in, I'll just do singular video game. Now I've gone from 21,000 results to 352. Now again, you don't have to go through all of these, but there are different ways to kind of narrow down what you might be looking for. So right now you can see that things are sorted by relevance. Well, if we're thinking of like Halo, what if I'm wanting to talk about the first Halo game for the very first Xbox? Well, instead of relevance, I might want to look for what's the oldest thing and see what comes up. And so I'm going to say date oldest. And so see here, like this is from October 1992. Well, that's before Halo was invented. So I know that's not right. 1993. A lot of these are coming up with things unrelated to Halo the video game by the company Bungie. But that gives me an idea. Well, what if I add another term? Because I know that Halo is made by Bungie, so I'll type in Bungie as another search term. So I'm looking for articles that have Halo, video game, and Bungie all in it in some place. Now I only have 29 sources to take a look at. And you can see I'm still searching, showing the results from the date oldest. So the oldest ones are at the top of the list, and then the newest ones are at the bottom. And I can see 2002, that would be about the first Halo game. And one thing about this, though, is you see it has this link, find it at CUNY. Well, sometimes these articles may be found in another database in which you click that link and then follow the links that show on the next page, and it may reveal the actual article, or it may say that you need to go find a print copy, in which case just skip it and go to the next source to see if you can actually access it. So like with this article that appeared in USA Today, the newspaper, HTML full text, I can click that and I'm going to be able to read that article. This one for Time Magazine by the writer Lev Grossman, HTML full text. I can click it, I have access to it. It gives me all the bibliographic information that I need. And again, I'll talk more about this later this semester, but we are using the MLA format for all of our citations. So make sure while you're doing your research in your notebooks, write down all the bibliographic information for any source that you might be quoting from, so that you always keep track of quotes, so that there's never like an issue with plagiarism by accidentally incorporating the writing someone else has done and presenting it as your own. You always want to put those things into quotes, have a parenthetical citation afterwards, shows what page number it appeared on, and then at the end of your essay you'll have your works cited section where you have the bibliographic entries for each of your cited sources. I'll talk more about that later this semester, but right now document everything that you might actually put a quote from in your notes as you're doing this research. And also save these documents to a flash drive, to your computer hard drive, Dropbox, somewhere so that you can easily go back to them. Don't just rely on them all being in the databases and you finding them again, because that can be a real pain in the ass to do that. Save yourself some trouble and just download these things. And the same is true for the other databases. Why don't we try one of those? Why don't I go to P and I'm going to go to Project Muse. And so in the search box here, you can see that it's far simpler than what we had over at Academic Search Complete. You can later change this to an advanced search and gives you a lot more options, but with Project Muse, we can just start out with this. And let's say I want to do research on a Philip K. Dick novel. And so I may just start off by just typing in Philip K. Dick. And we can see that it brought up 15,832 results. So now that's like a lot. That's way too many, obviously, to go through. So there's a couple of things how I can filter this and narrow it down. First off, there's this issue of access. Now, there's obviously a lot more content available in these databases than what City Tech or CUNY can afford to provide all of us. So they have to pick and choose what they think is like the best stuff and just pay for that. So we can narrow this down a little bit by choosing only content I have access to. And that way we don't have to see results that we wouldn't be able to access anyways. And see, that dropped the results over tenfold. Now it's like 1790 results. Now how about I think about like what is the novel I might be wanting to research, and how about I'll do Valis, favorite. Now it's only 16 results. So again, use these built-in search tools in the databases to begin narrowing down. I would always begin with just like one term and see what's out there, and then narrow it down by adding another term, until you get a manageable list of sources to take a look at. And again, these databases give you all the bibliographic information you need: title, author, the title of the journal, volume, number, date, and page numbers. Everything that you need. And with some things you can download a PDF, like a scan of the article. Others, like this one that's only online, you click view. You can also click view on these, but I would suggest downloading those that have PDF links, so you can save it more easily. But you can also save web pages as well. Now, one thing to also pay attention to is that some of the results are going to be reviews. Reviews are evaluations of, like, say, books or special issues of journals, and they may not present new research like what you're needing for your project. And so we can look here under these tools for narrowing down the results under content type and narrow it down just to articles. And that way we're not seeing reviews. So now we're only looking at articles, research articles, that mention Philip K. Dick and mention the book Valis. And how some of them do that, I don't know. You may have to look through, but like Fitzgerald and Hemingway, that's interesting that all of those words appear in that one. But this is part of the I think the fun of research is like trying to dive through these things. And whenever you're diving in, I don't expect you to read these articles from start to finish. Once you've opened it up, you can press Control F or Command F on a Mac and search through the article just for like the word you're looking for. And that way you can see if it's worth your time to read the whole thing or maybe just a section of it. Because again, part of this exercise is not just to be learning about all these things, but to be building up your research chops, to build your skill set at doing research. And part of that involves you continually trying to refine and improve what you're looking at so that you're not overwhelmed with having to read everything, because that's certainly not what you have to do for this kind of project. All right, so we have these different sources that I want you to begin looking at. I want you to be thinking about what work of science fiction you're going to choose. And you need to send me that email, right, where you let me know what you have in mind as the topic of your essay. So that's jellis@citytech.cuny.edu. Now, that doesn't have to be done right away, but the sooner you send that to me, the sooner I can reply to you and give you some other ideas or say that this sounds great. So your homework, the only things that are actually due next week are to do the readings, H.G. Wells' The Time Machine Abridged, and E.M. Forster's The Machine Stops. And in the lecture next week, I'm going to be talking about proto-science fiction, H.G. Wells' brand of scientific romances, Jules Verne's Fantastic Voyages, or Extraordinary Voyages rather, and what essentially sets things up for what we now call science fiction. So we're almost there. These things are all science fictional in different ways and are a part of the history of science fiction, but there wasn't yet a word for it. And so we'll talk about that in the lecture next week. What's actually due, besides the readings, is your weekly writing assignment on Open Lab. So I'll have a new post there for you to reply to add a comment where you write 250 words, talk about your the lecture, talk about your readings for the week, connections you might make to other science fiction, but the idea is to be reporting on your thinking. Your note-taking. And then, of course, next week I'll also talk about how to scan and then submit your notebook so far. So make sure that you are making notes on the lectures, making notes on the readings, not just for your benefit, but also to show me that you're doing this important work that's a part of learning in this class, and that I think will be advantageous for your learning outside of our class if you make note-taking a part of your daily practices, not just in school, but once you're in the workplace. Okay? As a reminder, my email address is jellis@citytech.cuny.edu. Email me when you got questions. My office hours are going to be Wednesday, 3 to 5 p.m. The link is at the very top of our syllabus on Google Hangouts. And then also you can see other things that I've been doing that is science fiction related on my blog, dynamicsubspace.net. I want everybody to hang in there. We're, I think, making good progress so far. I've been enjoying your posts that you've been making on our Open Lab site. You can respond to one another. Make this as much a community as you want and as you can. I understand you are all you've got very different schedules, so with it being an asynchronous class, I know it can make things more difficult in that regard. But I think you can get a lot out of it by trying to connect with some of your classmates through our Open Lab site. And think of our Open Lab course site as where we can build community about science fiction. And so I look forward to also talking with you during my office hours, or if you want to make an appointment with me, or if you just simply want to talk over email. So good luck with everything. Stay well, be safe, and I'll be talking with you all again real soon.